So we are in Rome, but we didn't see each other so long.
Yeah, we're in Rome, but we're still on video.
So I'm really missing the David Beasley. Huh?
Yeah, he's still in Washington.
Oh yeah. It's, you see, I push. Now you hear that, you got that the newest progress on vaccination.
Yeah, we have a meeting today, so thank you. Keep pushing.
Yeah, I will push next week, next Monday or third. I will talk directly with the new Minister of Health.
All right, everybody, are we ready to get started? Sorry to interrupt, but our attendees are joining the Zoom. So, greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 1 of the UNDESA Global Policy Dialogues for Climate Action, Building Food and Water Security in an Era of Climate Shocks. Thank you for joining us today, here over Zoom and on Facebook during this week in which we are celebrating World Water Day. My name is Ariel Alexievich, and I'm a Sustainable Development Officer at the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. We have a great 90-minute program ahead of us with many wonderful speakers who will discuss access to food and water for agriculture in this era of climate change. But first, a few logistical notes. Please note that English captions are available here in the Zoom by clicking on the captioning icon at the bottom of the screen. Also, live captions are available in the 6 official UN languages. These are available on a separate website, bit.ly/captions24march, and I'm going to post this in the Zoom and Facebook chat boxes. There will be a drop-down menu for choosing your language. This event will be archived on the UNDESA Facebook page at facebook.com/UNDESA. So if you want to rewatch it or you get disconnected, you can follow the event immediately after this event is finished. Also, we welcome your captions and we welcome your questions during this event. If you've joined us on Zoom, you can post your questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you are with us on Facebook, you can post a question right in the chat. Our time is short, but we will attempt to address as many as we can. So a note to panelists and speakers to please keep your cameras off and microphones on mute, except when you are speaking. And with that, I am pleased to introduce Mr. Zhenmin, the UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, to deliver welcome remarks. The floor is yours, Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Ariel. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of DESA, welcome you all to the first session of the Global Policy Dialogues for Climate Action, building a global coalition for sustainability after COVID-19. These policy dialogues intend to highlight the multiple ways that climate change is threatening the fragile progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. They will examine the interlinkages between food, water, energy, transport, forest financing, and climate change. Today's session is one of this series. We are going to focus on food and water security in the area of climate shocks. This session is co-organized by the UNDESA with our partners in the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and the World Food Program. So let me take this opportunity to thank my colleagues, Director General of FAO, Mr. Chu, and also Deputy Director General of WFO, Amir, Abdullah. Dear colleagues, the experts gathered here will discuss how climate change is affecting people's access to water for sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. Indeed, water scarcity, floods, and long-term drought are just some of the factors leaving food production and distribution systems vulnerable to collapse. We also discuss how governments, the private sector, consumers, and other stakeholders can work together to ensure that water resources are used sustainably in the changing climate. This conversation will serve as a UN Food Systems Summit dialogue, supporting Action Track 1 on ensuring safe and nutritious food for all. It will also support Action Track 5 on building resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stress. As noted by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, 2021 is a critical year for mobilizing the global coalition for carbon neutrality. Net zero emissions would give us the best chance for protecting our water resources and ensure an adequate food supply for all. My hope is that the insights presented by the experts today will be of value to you as we work together to achieve the shared SDGs. I wish you have a very successful session. I thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Liu, for that warm welcome. I have the honor now to introduce our first keynote speaker, Mr. Ku Dongyu, Director General of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Mr. Ku, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Aria and Mr. Liu. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your invitation for this special key remarks. Impact of the climate change on production, livelihood, ecosystem have a worrying implication for food security and nutrition. Science shows that climate change is the increasing variability in the water cycle and distribution. This will reduce the predictability of water availability and demand, affect water quality, exacerbate the water scarcity, and disrupt the livelihood of millions of rural people who depend on agriculture. Freshwater resources are the cradle of the humankind. Our history involves around the civilizations that were born on the banks of the Nile, the Ganges, the Yellow River, just to name a few. Uncontaminated freshwater is at the core of the health agri-food systems. Pastoralists need it for its stock, fish for its livelihood, food processors to ensure food safety. However, freshwater resources are becoming increasingly scarce as the population grows, urbanization and industrialization development, lifestyle and diet change. This will constrain the efforts and the capacities for effective adaptation to the climate change, worsen inequality in access to the water, threaten the sustainability of water-related ecosystems and the livelihoods that depend on them. Climate change is leading to extreme fluctuation of rainfall, increased challenges for rain-fed agriculture. Recent estimates suggest that almost 800 million hectares, or 14% of rain-fed cropland and pastoral are severely affected by the recurring drought. Furthermore, over 60% of the irrigated cropland, about 171 million hectares, are under high to very high water stress. Farmers have been adapted to change in precipitation and temperature of a million. However, the current pace and the magnitude on these changes are of a great concern, especially for the rural poor. If we do not address the climate change challenges swiftly and boldly, we will fail to achieve the sustainable development goals, especially now that the global economy has been hit hardly by COVID-19 pandemic. It is essential to take an informed decision towards the green and sustainable recovery. Timely action at the appropriate scale by all stakeholders towards sustainable and integrated water resources management will play a key role. We will also need to embrace a holistic approach because the competition and demand for water is growing in all sectors. A more efficient use of water resources are needed in both rain-fed and irrigated agriculture. This is the only way to produce more with limited water resources while adapting to climate change and mitigating its impacts. It sounds obvious, but it is not, because using water more efficiently must be done while having the preserved water-related ecosystems that sustain livelihood, ensure inequitable access to clean water for all. Achieving SDG 6 on water and sanitation for all is essential for achieving SDG 2 on food and nutrition for all. Ladies and gentlemen, with this in view, FAO proposed 3 major entry points for action to address water and climate-related challenges in agriculture. At the technical and management level, first entry point, larger productivity gains are within reach through investment in rainwater harvesting and conservation, improve the irrigation systems, alongside the use of drought-tolerant varieties, improve the grazing, and innovative technology. Sustainable soil management and the recarbonization of soils can significantly contribute to water harvesting and increase the productivity. The water stored in the soil serves as a source for 90% of the world agricultural production and represents about 65% of the planet freshwater. We must build the business case to make investment in sustainable agriculture and water management appealing and adoptable to the decision makers, farmers, and the investors. FAO provides key information tools to make this possible. For example, FAO Global Information System on Water and Agriculture, we call it AquaStat, collects and analyzes national level data of water resources and their uses in agriculture across 147 member countries. To monitor and assess water productivity at the different levels and timelines, FAO launched an innovative online platform named WAPO, an open source remote science-based tool to benefit farmers and decision makers alike. By presenting accurate information in a consistent, understanding way, AquaStat and WAPO are examples of valuable tools for adaptive water management to a changing climate. The second entry point to address water and climate-related challenges in agriculture is good governance, effective situation, and legal frameworks to create an inclusive, enabling environment for all actors. Build up water-saving society is a joint mission on climate change. In this respect, FAO stressed the importance of water accounting and auditing, ensure water and land turn, and mechanism to ensure incentives for effective water use. Community-based water user association can also play the crucial role in sustainable management of water. All this institutional dimension become even more critical under climate change to ensure the ability of stakeholders to adapt. Finally, the overall policy environment is the third entry point. It is key to promoting sustainable management of water. In particular, we need the right incentives and disincentive measures to encourage favorable investment by adoption of best practice and facilitate adaptation. If subsidy on input and energy promote inefficient water use, efforts to improve water productivity might be made in vain. Policy harmonization is key to promote sustainable management of water. We have to look at water-related issues from the overall perspective of economic, social, environmental sustainability, as well as livelihood, not only of farmers, but also able citizens, industry, and the energy sectors. We have to share the cost and the investment needed to increase water efficiency and reach the sustainability. Thus, coordination across sectors and geographic areas to ensure policy coherence is also essential for the favorable policy environment. In the context of climate change, this also means taking into account that agriculture can substantially contribute to the balanced global carbon cycle, limit the greenhouse gas emissions. Some of these mitigation options are linked to improving water management, as it is the case of the methane emission from rice production. Others can improve water sources availability, also mitigating climate change, as it is in case of avoid deforestation. Policy coherence is therefore important for agricultural system, both as a user of the water, but also as a potential contributor to the climate change mitigation. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, let me stress that agricultural system must play a central role in addressing climate change, growing water resources constraints. At the FAO, we are ready to tackle this challenge. Our strategic framework 2022 to 2031 seeks to support the 2030 agenda through the transformation to more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agricultural system for better production, better nutrition, a better environment, a better life, leaving no one behind. We provide the information, experience, and the tools that we can turn innovative ideas into reality on the ground for the world free of poverty and hunger. Thank you. Over to you.
Great. Thank you, Director General, for your remarks that frame our discussion today and really show how all of the Sustainable Development Goals are interlinked with each other. Now, I would like to introduce our second keynote speaker, Mr. Amir Mahmood Abdullah, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Programme. Mr. Abdullah, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ariel, and thank you, DG FAO and UNDESA for opening this, and very happy to be here on behalf of the World Food Programme to just address you before you begin what I think is going to be a very exciting discussion on this hugely important issue of water and the role it plays in food security and agriculture, and especially in this era of climate shocks. But just to frame it, humanitarian needs are rising faster now than at any other time in the 21st century. And the number of people who depend on life-saving humanitarian assistance is just simply growing day by day. And the rapid rise of hunger is now being driven by an intersection of different crises, particularly what we refer to as the 3 Cs: conflict, climate change, and COVID-19. 2020 has not only been a year of a devastating pandemic, it was also one of the hottest years on record, a year of destructive heat waves, wildfires, floods, storms, locust outbreaks. And humanitarian aid can never be enough to manage these cascading shocks that keep breaking down food systems and pushing people into food and water crises. Food and water security are 2 sides of the same coin. We can deliver food assistance, but if farmers don't have adequate access to water resources for food production, people will just continue being hungry. And if people don't have access to clean water, they can't retain the nutrition they need, even if we provide them with food assistance. So in the coming decades, many regions around the world are expected to experience increased water scarcity, driven by climate change and exacerbated by increasing competition for water resources. The battle for water will be one of the next great challenges. And right now, we're at a critical crossroads that will inform the trajectory of future demand for humanitarian assistance. We know there will be more climate shocks in the future. We know that we need to prepare for more and bigger responses to more and greater emergencies. And we know that there is still too little investment in disaster prevention, risk reduction, and resilience building. In fact, when we talk about resilience in WFP, we talk about programs and systems that help communities to absorb, adapt, and transform their livelihoods in the face of coming bigger and bigger shocks. But that's why, through 2021 and beyond, WFP has decided we are going to get out there and rap. And before you all think I'm going to start breaking into song, let me just assure you that rap has an R that stands for restoring, using natural solutions against future climate hazards. A stands for anticipating those climate hazards and acting before lives need saving. And P stands for protecting the most vulnerable with climate risk insurance and other safety nets. But while we're trying to wrap our resilience building, we're also facing growing shocks. Humanitarian assistance typically kicks in as soon as a risk has materialized, and materialized in losses and damages, both economic and often in human lives. And there should be no good reason to keep treating shocks as inevitable or even as natural surprises. We know they're coming, especially when we take a view on food and water security. Here we have clear opportunities to link humanitarian and development objectives. And this is an issue that WFP is bringing to the fore through the 2021 Food Systems Summit, where WFP is anchoring the Resilience Action Track. And the Food Systems Summit will offer a crucial window of opportunity for us to engage in establishing productive, equitable, and sustainable food systems, which in turn should contribute to resilient societies and peace for all nations and all people. The acceleration of trends such as climate change, biodiversity loss, conflict, and displacement are having a huge and enormous impact on food security. There are compounding existing vulnerabilities, and these make the Food Systems Summit that we're about to go into later this year a timely and much needed forum where we can advance those changes and build new synergies. And as we progress towards the summit, countries are looking for innovative ideas to build more resilient societies, address the root causes of food and water insecurity. And this has to be done by investing in local communities. We support the most vulnerable people to become agents of change, not passive resistance of aid. And when different crises collide and magnify each other's, generating the perfect storm for those vulnerable societies, it's time for us all to get together and battle the storm. And I really hope that today's event will inspire all of us here and all of us beyond those just watching to come together and join the resilience wrap: restore, anticipate, and protect. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Abdullah, for introducing us to the frameworks of WRAP and the 3 Cs, and for emphasizing that the need for action is now and it's up to us. So with that, let's get right to it. Let's get to our first panel discussion on ensuring sustainable access to water and food for all in an era of climate shocks. I'd like to introduce the moderator of the panel, Fiona Harvey of The Guardian. Welcome, Fiona. And everyone in that first panel, please turn on your cameras. And Fiona, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to introduce our first panel this morning. As we've just heard, we'll be talking about ensuring sustainable access to water and food for all in an era of climate shocks. And of course, our previous speakers have shown us very clearly how important that is. So let me introduce our panelists. First of all, we have Cherry Atilano, who's the Chief Executive and President of AGREA, which is a fair trade and sustainable agricultural organization in the Philippines. Hello. We have Betty Chinyamunyamu, Chief Executive of the National Smallholder Farmers Association of Malawi. Hello, Betty. We have Mark Gordon, who's the Head of Asset Creation and Livelihoods Unit at the World Food Programme. We have Mike Kunga, a nutritionist with the civil society organization Nutrition Alliance, who's also the youth chair of the UN Food Systems Summit, which we've heard a lot about. He's the chair there of Action Track 5. And finally, Sasha Ku-Oshima, Deputy Director of Land and Water at the Food and Agricultural Organization. Thank you to all for being here. We're going to hear a little bit from you, and we're going to have questions from our audience as well. Some have already been submitted, more can be submitted through the Q&A function, so please be aware of that. We don't have an enormous amount of time for this discussion, so I'd like all of us to keep our answers very much to the point, because we've got a lot to get through. I'd like to ask, first of all, about how water scarcity, climate shocks, long-term drought, but also flood conditions, how all of these climate events are affecting food production, distribution, and access to water for agriculture globally. For that, I'll go first of all to Sasha, please.
Good morning, Fiona, and it's a pleasure for me to be here. All aspects of food security are potentially affected by climate change, and freshwater resources, as we heard from the speakers, is a scarce water resource. And with population growth, various stressors, income increase, and our diets change with more meat-based diets, which requires more water for production, And agriculture already accounts for 70% of freshwater resources withdrawals in the world today. This is a overall figure. And in the Near East and North Africa, freshwater resources are even more scarce as they have decreased by 2/3 during the last 40 years and expected to fall 50% by 2050. So this is a very dangerous path for water-related ecosystems and the livelihoods that depend on them. And lives of over 1 billion people are severely strained by water scarcity and also water shortages. I want to mention also about the agriculture from both rain-fed and irrigated agriculture. And rain-fed inadequate rainfall through climate change, we heard, is going to affect about 8 million hectares, or 14% of our cropland and pasture land. And 60% of our irrigated cropland are under very high to high water stress. So we need to sustainably intensify our food production within the limits of the natural resource base. There's a growing competition of water resources and also the inequality in access to water. And in the 2030 agenda, in leaving no one behind, the poorest and the vulnerable are the ones we also need to watch out for, especially when we design our policies, our aid, all of our entrance into addressing the rural poor and the small scale farmers and women that are majority of the communities in this rural landscape. Their access to safe and clean water will be key in our development process, not only immediate aid, but also at FAO, we are developing the techniques and also the technology that will be accessible to the rural poor. So as we design various digital platforms in which we will address some of the real-time informatics in dealing with droughts and floods, etc., we are also dealing with some of the information that will go to the cell phones of the small farmers. And rural areas and their income distribution, and also, as we heard in our opening keynotes, it's very important to get these investments down to the local scale, especially to the rural poor, including the shifts in production areas for both food and non-food around the world. So reliable water supply is crucial in this equation to ensure access to water for food, as well as water for drinking water and other sectoral uses. And so at FAO, we're looking at this from a smart irrigation and smart wash, water sanitation and hygiene push in a multiple use system, and looking at this from a systemic, holistic hydrological cycle perspective. So recurrent droughts can lead to also, we heard from our DG from FAO, that it reduces soil fertility, reduces output, loss of livestock, and so on, and definitely limited access to markets. So we need to look at also how to revitalize these marginal lands. And as we move into the decade of ecosystem restoration, there's a lot of convergence right now in looking at it from sustainable production that benefits not only agriculture, farming, community livelihoods, rural areas, as well as urban areas. This linkage needs to be observed. But looking at this from the food system transformations we heard, as we move into producing more with less, more sustainably, adapting to and also mitigating to climate change, bringing carbon into the soil through better nutrient management and storing water as well in our soils, and various landscape approaches to bringing water to a much more efficient productivity. As we call it at FAO, it's the productivity, it's not the yield anymore, it's the increasing yield, but increasing the productivity per unit of water that also values nutrition. So with that, I'd like to give the other panelists an opportunity to respond to your question.
Thank you very much indeed, Sasha. That was a great opening response there. That really helps to set the scene. I'd like to move over to Mark now from the World Food Programme to ask a similar question, really. I mean, what are we seeing out there in the real world? Because we sometimes have this idea that climate change is sometime in the future. But I think that we are seeing a lot of these impacts right now in our food systems. Please.
Thanks, Fiona. And yes, absolutely correct. We are seeing the impact of changing climates and climate change on rural agriculture. We see it quite clearly, as was mentioned in the opening remarks, in the number of people who are becoming acutely food insecure, who require emergency assistance. But I think what's also important is let's also look at how not only are we addressing the impact of climate change and the emergencies, but how we're also working collectively to build the resilience of communities by zooming in and working with households to reduce their vulnerability to the shocks and stressors, such as increased or prolonged periods of drought or potentially increased frequency of flooding on their livelihoods. And I think as what Amir Abdullah mentioned in his opening remarks, one way the World Food Programme is contributing to that is working right down at the community level, working with civil society, with partners and with governments to be able to invest in the local infrastructure that allows things such as water harvesting, allowing rainwater to be captured, improving the use of conservation agriculture, looking at how we can support communities in addressing their access and also potentially reducing their quantity of water they require for their agricultural productivity. And these actions, I think, not only allow us to be better prepared or to be able to protect communities when climate shocks occur, but I think also through the restoration and working with communities, again, thinking about our comment on the RAP, how we're able to restore degraded ecosystems by working with communities, by looking at reforestation and afforestation, looking at very community-based technologies that allow communities themselves to be able to access and be able to retain the natural water that's available and use it, I think, as Sasha said, in a smart way that increases the productivity per liter, thereby allowing less vulnerability when these climate shocks are happening, and potentially in the long run reduce the number of people who are severely affected and having their livelihood significantly disrupted when climate shocks such as drought, such as flooding occur.
Thank you very much. That's very useful, and thank you for that global view there. I'm going to move on now to get a view from some people about how the work they're doing is being implemented on the ground. Looking at the challenges faced in various areas and the impacts of climate shocks, as we just talked about. I'm going to turn first to you, Betty. Can you give us a flavour, please, of your experience?
Thank you very much, Fiona, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all joining us. This is a very interesting discussion, and certainly one that is at the heart of farmers, and coming from the National Farmers Association of Malawi, and also representing the World Farmers Organization. And on this panel, it is definitely an area where we as farmers have a lot of interest. And climate change and water management are certainly highly interlinked, as climate change causes changes in water cycle patterns. And over the past decades, with climate change, we've experienced heavy floods, heavy rains, droughts, and many other disasters that have affected agricultural production around the world. So while water really has potential to contribute significantly to agricultural production, it has also, over the past decade or so, really affected agricultural production. So we have seen there's increased incidences of new pests and new diseases. We have also seen with the unpredictable weather patterns that it is becoming more difficult for farmers to plan their farm enterprises. So when they're not sure whether they're going to have a flood or whether they're going to have a drought, it becomes very difficult for them to engage in some initiatives that are normally rewarding for them. Initiatives such as contract farming, contract marketing. So that unpredictability of weather is really making agriculture less profitable for the farmers. Also, and I must highlight that for vulnerable groups, such as female-headed households, these impacts are even more complicated because they compounded to a general lack of factors of production, land, labor, and the like. They also are faced with these multiple challenges that climate change is bringing. And with COVID-19, COVID-19 is really coming in as a new challenge, perhaps one that is exacerbating the challenges that are already there. So in terms of the urgency that we now have to deal with these issues of climate change, to deal with these issues of water scarcity and the like, COVID-19 increases that urgency, and that those existing challenges need to be addressed now rather than later. I would like really to, I guess my colleagues have also spoken a lot about what the impact is. And really just to move on from that, you know, even though we're seeing all these impacts, there are solutions that on the ground, we are already seeing solutions that perhaps need to be upscaled. And the first one that I'd like to focus on is the use of technology. So how technologies, appropriate technologies being developed. While there are some good cases and good examples to learn from, but we've noted many cases where technologies are not being developed with adequate participation of the end users of the technology. In this case, I'm talking of such groups as farmers. So technologies that end up being developed, but perhaps are not really adopted by the end users because they're inaccessible in terms of the cost, or they're just inappropriate because the views and perceptions of the end users were not incorporated. So it is important that as technologies to address these challenges are being developed, are being tested, are being disseminated, are being validated, the end users must be a key player of those technologies. Let me stop there for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that view. And yes, plenty in there to talk about. And also, I'm very glad that you brought up this issue of COVID and how that's affecting things as well at the moment. Thank you very much for that, Betty. I'm going to move over now to Cherry to get the view from where you are, Cherry, in the Philippines, please.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you very much for my panelists being here. It's so lovely to learn from everyone. Coming from the side of the Philippines, of course, you know, we have always an issue of too much water, having 20 to 21 typhoons every year. Like end of last year, you know, last year was pretty, it was such a crisis, I must say. The triple Cs was mentioned a while ago was really happening. We had volcanic eruption to start with, and then COVID-19 pandemic lockdown happened. And then in the last 2 months of the year, we had 6 typhoons coming a week after another. And that caused too much flooding in the largest rice production province in the country. This rice producing province is actually almost supplying, you know, 10% to 20% of our rice supply. But in some other instances, there are also drought that is happening, where all these rice farmers right now, they're the poorest farmers in the country, only earning around $2,000 in a year. And during drought, it's so hard for them to produce production. Usually they can only plant for once a year. So what we're trying to do in some of the smallholder farmers, so my company in Agrea, we work with 30,000 smallholder farmers in the country. And, you know, it's not an easy task to do. We're basically mostly a lot of young people who graduated agriculture, agricultural engineers, and extension workers, trying to work with these farmers on several technologies. So one is we focus on climate resilient cropping systems. So for example, for rice, what we're trying to work right now with the government is intercropping or relay cropping of rice and mung bean production, so that in a way we also manage, if it's drought or dry season, we can plant legumes. It will also rehabilitate the quality of the soil, and at the same time give money to farming during drought season or with little water. And another one, we provide interventions in coconut farmers. Rice farmers are the first poorest. The second poorest farmers are coconut farmers. If you are a smallholder with a hectare of land, you can only plant 100 coconut trees. So every typhoon, usually they lost 3 to 5, or sometimes in worst one, they could lose like 10 coconut trees, and it takes years to grow another coconut. So we do intercropping. We plant superfoods under the coconut trees. So we usually go for turmeric and ginger, because these are high value products and these are root crops, climate resilient. So when coconuts would fall, farmers still have turmeric and ginger, and around it, we try to help them plant vegetables for their own consumption, and also take care of livestock like poultry and some other small ruminants that they can take care, so that they're well taken care of. And then lastly, we also focus on nutrient-dense farming systems. So right now we're trying to work with farmers who are situated in typhoon belt in the country to work on root crops that they can grow under the soil, so that if there's like too much flooding or drought, they can still survive after the drought. So some of the interventions that we're actually doing in our company, it's really mostly private driven, but we work a lot with the government on some interventions. Like we work with the government on irrigation system provision to farmers. But on our company capacity, we work on solar water pumps. So we have been installing solar water pumps on areas and communities that are inaccessible or with very little source of water, or they have almost impossible access to water. So we work with experts, and then in the Philippines, you have so much sun. So we utilize the power of sun to produce solar water pump. The most beautiful one actually was during the drought season. There's like also a drying out river where we drenched the river and we developed a solar water pump that it watered an entire area where the farmers had no water for 30 years. And it was a very good intervention. So this one we're trying to replicate in some other areas, because at the end of the day, we believe as a company that agriculture is not only about producing food, it's really about producing income for our farmers, and also, to provide better food production for the Filipinos. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Terry. That does sound extraordinarily challenging with what the shocks that you've experienced, but really a message of resilience there too. So thank you for that. I'd like to move on finally for this question to Mike to get some of the views from where you are, please. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Fiona, and thanks everyone for joining this meeting. Actually, for me, it's a very huge pleasure to be here, because I know that some of these discussions, I'm going to take them forward to my action track, which I represent, action track 5, which is building resilience to vulnerability, shocks, and stress. So let me first agree with my country colleague, Kabeji, that climate crisis is hugely affecting farmers, especially last year, whereby a lot of farmers or a lot of crops were washed away or were devastated due to cyclone Idai and cyclone Kenneth in southern Malawi, some areas like in Mozambique. At the same time, I focus much on building agroecology in my speech, because I see that's the best way, and that's the only way. And this is also one of the ways which we are, one of the solutions to say so, which we are focusing our action track 5. So there was a recent report which was developed, and I saw it I think yesterday, by Third World International Services, which highly indicate that agroecology is hugely underfunded, and the probably I'll also share the report with you, maybe would be of better interest. So despite that, we are moving now from we are moving towards conventional agriculture, but we realize that many of the funding from Europe and other countries are not highly prioritizing agroecology, which we have pioneered, and we have seen it that is of great use, and it can help ensuring that we provide food which is sustainable and safe to each and everyone. At the same time, I also focus on the angle of that many of the smallholder farmers or people who are engaging in agriculture, you find that there's a very little focus that is going to the youth. I talk of the youth because I represent the youth in a number of networks. You see that we are not able to provide that knowledge capacity to the young people who in the next time, or actually the agriculture entrepreneurs. The focus has been to other old people and the like, who are probably, I might say that they're used to what they produce. They might not be able to adapt agroecology and other agriculture smart interventions. But if you can have the capacity, as Shreya said, and what she's doing in her role, that she's trying to make sure that new agriculture graduates are able to work with her. Maybe we should also be able to adapt such kind of situation across the world, that young people who have the capacity or who have shown the interest in agriculture, let us be able to support them within their space. And the other thing is, you also take a look at the way we eat or consume as normally. There's a very low shift plant-based diets. Much of us, we think of maybe the processed food as the way one of achieving our diet. But at the same time, the industrial agriculture part of it is contributing a little more to the climate change. So if maybe we can have a twist in terms of what we eat, also make sure that we will be able to conserve the environment at the same time, ensuring that we are able to produce food for the entire nation. So let me stop here for a second. Sure.
Thank you very much indeed for that perspective, Mike. Right, I'm going to move on to some questions from our audience. We don't have a huge amount of time, so I'm going to ask you as panelists to let me know if you'd like to answer these questions, and when you do answer, to keep the replies short so we can get through as much as possible. We've already you touched on it, Betty, on the issue of COVID-19. And we've got a question on that, which I'd like to take first of all. Lockdowns and restrictions on the movement of goods during COVID-19 disrupted many food supply chains and resulted in food shortages. Rural women and girls are often left out in food distribution, and these inequalities have increased during COVID-19. What can governments and NGOs do about this? That question is from Samina Nazir in Islamabad, Pakistan. So a sort of double question there about the impacts of COVID and the impacts on women and girls, very importantly. Who'd like to come in on this? Cherry, would you like to speak to us on this first of all?
Oh, wow, that's a very relevant question, actually, Fiona. During the pandemic, my company has been the first to mobilize the shipment, of helping smallholder farmers get their produce access to market. However, it was so difficult. I remember it was around March 20 of last year that it's only like 4 days after the lockdown. A lot of farmers are actually asking where to bring their produce, and it wasn't easy because of so much restriction. So what we did, I personally wrote a letter to our Secretary of the Department of Agriculture asking for help if we can help these farmers first by providing like food pass to all the trucks, that if they have food pass, they can go through the checkpoints so that the farmers can be helped. And second one is we work with the Department of local government, where they can actually allow the farmers to go on the farms and harvest, because during that time, even the farmers were not allowed to go out. The fishermen were not allowed to go out. So there was one time, though, that we got a local government unit in Metro Manila where we have 12 million people looking for food because all the supermarkets' shelves were empty, and panic in food was also tremendous. So what we did with the local government, they actually allow some farmers to work on, to the fields, as long as they follow certain COVID-19 protocol. So those were the things that we were trying to do. But I think I always believe that private and public sector should work together during this most difficult time. I also want to touch point on the importance of women and girls. During the pandemic, it was so hard because most of the farmers we worked in different parts of the country. Philippines has 7,107 islands. It's not easy to ship goods, from different islands because you need to go either by ship or by plane. So my job was talking to all the ship owners or operators and plane operators and managers. And the most beautiful part, actually, all the people almost mobilizing on the ground are women. They are the ones like connecting us what bank is open, where to pay their production. And second one, the youth. I really need to emphasize the power of the youth in this problem of crisis. So the youth, they were allowed to go out because they're not overage, and they are the ones who are actually helping us so much with logistics, in terms of tracking and in shipping. So during COVID-19 crisis, of course, it's difficult, but there are ways to be done. And bottom line, it's really about public-private partnerships. And at the same time, utilizing the local manpower. The women and the youth, for me, are such a powerful force in this kind of crisis to move food forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very heartening to hear. Betty, you mentioned the impacts of COVID when you spoke to us a minute ago. Could you perhaps just tell us a little bit more about that, particularly with regard to the impacts on women and girls and what can be done for women and girls in this context, please?
Thank you very much. I think just to add to what has already been said, indeed, especially with lockdowns, we saw that there were disruptions to food distribution, even food markets. In Malawi, the first case of COVID was reported during the only one season, the marketing season. So that meant that farmers were going to lose everything that they had produced. So there was need to quickly come up with innovations to still be able to do marketing. And I'd like to really highlight the importance of digital platforms, how we're able to use digital platforms to pass on information on markets, to even pass on information on COVID. And the importance, especially where you're using mobile phones. And yes, even though women still have, less women have access to mobile phones than men, but you still have, if a woman has a mobile phone, it is theirs. They have control over the usage and the like. So if you pass on information to this woman through mobile phone, that is information that goes directly to them. So we're able to still provide extension support, or able to provide information on marketing, as well as do aggregation remotely using this digital platform. So that was really something that we saw was important to reach out to vulnerable groups. But secondly, also just want to highlight something that the World Food Programme has started doing a couple of years ago, which is the Purchase for Progress, where within the food purchases, they are specifically targeting supplies from smallholder farmers. So I think it's 10% of their food supplies are supposed to be bought from smallholder farmers. And I would really like to commend something like that and request that, such initiatives be extended to more vulnerable groups. So instead of just having smallholder farmers in general, we could have a specific portion that is allocated to female smallholder farmers, for example. So that would really help, because with the women, most of them have produced the crop, but they have challenges to actually get to markets. So if there are initiatives around markets that are specifically targeted at them, they would help. So I think, like I said before, that some of the other things, and I think FAO may have mentioned it as well, or was it WFP, where we say that beneficiaries of vulnerable groups need to be seen as agents of change. They need to be part of the solution. They need to be incorporated in the initiatives that we're doing. And by so doing, we're able really to address the challenges with them and empower them so that they also feel like they can get out of the situation that they're in, as opposed to creating a dependency where year in, year out, they're waiting for somebody to get them out of the challenge and the problems that they're in.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Betty. That's very practical there. And as well as the impact on women and girls, we've also seen, another questioner mentions that we have seen the impact of food security among older people as well. This questioner was talking particularly about Africa, but that can be applied elsewhere. The questioner, Elisha Sabali Mwamkinga, of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, would like to know what the international community is doing to mitigate the impact of this resulting food security among older people. Perhaps I could take you at this point, Mark.
Certainly, yeah. Thanks, Fiona. I think, clearly one of the areas that we've learned from the COVID crisis is particularly how we can further strengthen existing safety net programs, government programs that target different segments of the society with different types of transfers, and how during the COVID period, WFP worked very closely with quite a few governments to be able to look at being able to expand or deepen those types of social transfers to ensure that elderly, vulnerable, youth-led households and other groups were assisted. I think COVID was a major shock, as was emphasized in the opening remarks, and as a global community, we're learning how to become more efficient and more effective. But quite clearly, how the humanitarian and the development world, or the sort of global community more broadly, can further work with existing systems, existing mechanisms to augment them and deepen them, I think is also a way that we contribute to building the resilience of communities, of individuals to shocks such as COVID, or what we're seeing more and more with a lot of the natural disasters that are created or of greater frequency and greater occurrency and greater intensity. I think that was described by our colleague from the Philippines.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Mark. That's very useful. And finally, I'd like to put our last question in this panel. First of all, to you, Mike, and then to you, Sasha, which is to look at what actually works. We have a questioner, Anchal Vidyasagar in Lucknow, India, who'd like to know, who'd like you to shed light on what works, on the successful projects, preferably in the global south. He's particularly interested, he or she actually, is particularly interested in what's most cost-effective, preferably low in maintenance and sustained by local communities. Can you give us your perspective, please, on what do you think makes for a successful strategy, please, Mike?
Sorry, Fiona, that was directed at me, I take it?
Sorry, that was at Mark. We've just heard from
Yeah.
you. It was at Mike. Sorry, not you, Mark. It was directed at Mike Kunga.
Well, thanks so much for the question.
Thanks.
I think the best strategy, as Betty said in the first place, is engaging the community and the community being at the heart of everything. I recently talked of agroecology as the key in transforming our food system and ending hunger, at the same time ensuring that everyone has safe and sufficient food. So the best way we can promote agroecology is giving the support to farmers, giving the support to smallholder farmers that are promoting agroecology. And we can only do this by we are trying to engage them, see what they can do, and provide their markets so that they can also be able to move forward with the product. At the same time, there has to be deliberate effort to support youth-led entrepreneurs who are doing agriculture. This will also be key in ensuring that the next generation is able to adapt to what we started. So I think the best strategy would be in such similar cases.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Mike. Thank you. And finally, for the final word on this, I'm going to go over to you, Sasha, please.
Thank you. And I think it's great, reflections from all of the panelists in addressing this question. And I think there's a lot of policies that needs to be coupled. First, not only emergency relief, but also the post-emergency, the technical assistance. And Betty has raised about the technologies, and we're really improving on the digital technologies that would get down to the scale of small-scale farmers. That goes from the scientific predictive informatics to also microcredit accessing. So there's an increased call for investments in all of this infrastructure, calling on the youth for more innovative supply chains. FAO, we've introduced the Hand in Hand initiative that is really looking at what is needed at that particular local scale at the subnational level, whether it is transport that's a problem, the food is being held at the port, or what is the actual problem. So the policymakers, local level as well as national level and regional, global levels can address these collectively and coherently. So moving from these more macro responses in water investments, infrastructure to other local level water harvesting at the community level or irrigation, addressing at women also, and this is really important, and utilizing both the innovation that the youth is more attracted to bring all of this together to manage water appropriately. It's really important, and also develop various drought and flood preparedness plans. It starts with the community, definitely, and it needs to go up to the national level as well as down, as both ways. And we're doing this we have a lot of techniques and technologies in stress tolerant crops, to intercropping, to multiple cropping, to deficit irrigation. There are various alternative varieties of nutritious crops that is also water efficient. We would like to bring all these best practices to the local levels and all the networks of Women for Women networks, to other, there are a long list of support organizations. So please engage with us, and we would very much like to work this together through the Food System Transformation Summit that is coming up, to bring more of these dialogues and more understanding with each other. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much indeed, Sasha. And that's a very neat segue into our next panel, actually, where we'll be discussing more of that. But thank you very much indeed for that intervention there. And thank you to all of our panelists for your great contributions today. I'm sorry we can't hear even more from you, because you've obviously got a huge wealth of experience and thoughts there for us, but that will have to wait for another time. Thank you so much, panelists. You can turn your video off now, but of course you're welcome to attend the rest of the session, because next we're going to move on. We've got a second panel coming up, but in between, I'm very pleased to be able to tell you that we have Kellyanne Naylor, who is the Vice Chair of UN Water and Associate Director for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF, who's going to give us some keynote remarks now. So Kellyanne, we're delighted that you can join us today. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you so much, Fiona, and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. And in my role as Vice Chair of UN Water, it gives me great pleasure to be here with you today. And just congratulations for the very interesting discussion that you've just had. I really enjoyed it. So first, let me thank Undersecretary General Mr. Liu and UNDESA for organizing the UNDESA Global Policy Dialogues for Climate Action. Many of you may know that just 2 days ago, we celebrated World Water Day on the topic of valuing water. And this year, the global campaign asked us to answer one simple question: what does water mean to you? For me, water means hope, and the water we drink, the food we eat, the integrity of the natural environment, our life itself, all depend on safe, sufficient, and sustainable supplies of water. But today, water is, of course, under extreme threat. And we've heard today from multiple directions. We have a growing population, we have increasing demands of agriculture, and we're certainly feeling the worsening impacts of climate change. The greatest of all freshwater consumers, as many of you know, is irrigated agriculture, which accounts for more than 70% of the global water withdrawals, and 41% of the withdrawals globally are not compatible with sustaining ecosystem services. We've heard that 3.2 billion people live in agricultural areas with high to very high water shortages or scarcity, with 1.2 billion people living in severely water-constrained agricultural areas. These numbers are really staggering, and we know that behind the numbers, it's the most vulnerable who are bearing the brunt of this. I think we also know from the water community that SDG 6 is off track, but what we do also know is that we can speed up progress, and the question is, of course, not if it is possible, but how. So I'd really like to offer 3 thoughts on this. I think the first one is that we need to shift perspectives. In 2019, we released the UN Water Policy Brief on Climate Change and Water, where we stressed the urgency of improving water management, ensuring transboundary cooperation, and rethinking financing. For me, one of the most thought-provoking suggestions was, how do we move from looking at water as a threat and a problem to considering it part of the solution? And indeed, we can see, and we've heard today, that proactive agricultural policies, risk management can all build greater societal resilience to the effects of climate change. And we've also really heard how this can reduce the need for an emergency response, which is also part of the work that we're doing on reducing fragility and contributing to the humanitarian development nexus. But this is going to require a fundamental shift in the way that water and agriculture is perceived and managed. And thinking of water as a solution, I believe, will help attract greater commitment and the required investments to make these needed changes. The second one is let's accelerate. And last year, many of you may know that UN Water launched the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework with the full backing of the United Nations family to unite and our global efforts across sectors and stakeholders to solve the water crisis at country level. And even just last week, many of you may have joined us at the President of the General Assembly convened a high-level meeting on water that used this acceleration framework to help us call for greater action and acceleration on SDG 6. This framework focuses on 5 accelerator areas: financing, data and information, capacity development, innovation, and governance. And through this, we will have stronger collective action and collaboration. And this can really have the required multiplier effect across SDG 6 and other SDGs, such as SDG 2 and 13. And many of the partners I see here today are already actively contributing to this framework. So third, let's broaden the dialogue. And as you said, on the 27th of April, the UN family, along with 4SD, will organize a Food Systems Summit Global Dialogue on water, the game changer for food systems. Really being able to bring together this food community together with the water community to discuss topics around the 5 Food System Summit action tracks and the water-related challenges and opportunities for food systems at country and regional level is going to be a fantastic opportunity for us to come together to have this type of interactive and cross-sectoral dialogue, which we know can go very far in achieving our common development objectives. So let's reach out further and deeper into the knowledge, skills, and capacities from our mutual communities to be able to go faster and farther together. Ladies and gentlemen, progress is possible only if we can take advantage of these interconnected, universal, and integrated nature of the 2030 agenda. Our route is clear. And working together through the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework and these other processes that are in place, we can respond to the needs of people, the needs of the planet, both the needs of today and also meet those needs of tomorrow. So thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today. I wish you a successful discussion and very much look forward to continuing the food and water conversation. Thank you. Fiona, back over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kellyanne. That was great, actually. And yes, as you say, very concerning situation, but good that we're finding ways to do something to solve these problems. So thank you very much. And that provides a great introduction, actually, to our next session, which is very much about finding solutions. And we're looking at innovative solutions for improving access to clean and safe water around the world. And to talk about that, I've got some wonderful guests for you who can turn on their cameras, please, now. We're about to hear from you. Let me introduce them. We have Samir Ibrahim, who is co-founder of Sun Culture, which is a startup for solar powered generation and water pumps in Africa. We also have Tanya Eulalia Martinez Cruz, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Greenwich and also a member of the Global Hub on Indigenous peoples' food systems. We have Zahin Razin, founder of HydroQuo Plus, which is a startup dedicated to ensuring water security in Bangladesh, and who is also UN Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals class of 2020. And finally, we have Felix Reinders, who is the chair of the Global Framework on Water Security for Agriculture. So welcome to all. And we don't have a great deal of time for this panel. We're running quite tight. But I want to hear from all of you, and we have some fantastic questions for you. So let me just plunge straight into those questions. I'm going to ask you first, Felix, about the documented good practices for improving access to clean and safe water and food. What have you seen that you would like to highlight briefly that can be expanded to a larger scale? What would you highlight?
Thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, maybe just a little background. WASAC, most probably not anyone or everybody know WASAC, the Global Framework on Water Scarcity in Agriculture. And Kelly already gave a lot of facts about water and the availability of that in the world. Now, we know that water scarcity is, of course, a global issue with 4 billion people that are affected. And that is about 66% of all our people. And if one just look at water as the main input for food production, it played a significant role in population growth and societal evolution over much of the recorded human history. And of course, it's direct or indirect part of 7 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, of course, water is of great importance, as water is the key to food security. Without water, crops simply cannot grow. And we know water is not just for primary production, it plays a vital role at all stages along the agricultural food chain. So,
Felix,
water,
we've heard quite a lot about these issues already. So I think we really need you to highlight really some good practices here. This is a practical session about innovative solutions. Please, thank you.
Yes, I'm coming to that because
we need you to come to it quickly, though, because we don't have a lot of time. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think some of the main activities is, of course, the publication that WASAC have developed, and that is the water stress and human migration, the proactive approaches to drought preparedness and so on. And then coming to the practical ones, I think it has been mentioned already, and that is, for instance, the solar-powered water filtration systems. that are being utilized today in many countries, and many of our waters are being contaminated. So there are innovative ways of filtration systems that can produce up to 20,000 liters of clean water in a day for many years. We have seen, for instance, fog catchers there in Morocco, where they are using this in the mountains that provide 6,300 liters of water that can be harvested daily. And then, of course, desalination, not something new, but very appropriate, especially for our developing countries. There are many plants operating today, still very expensive. A lot of questions I've seen from the participants today, but there are around 400 plants in 40 countries, China, India, Australia, and so on. And then one of my favorite, you could say, practical solutions is there's a non-profit organization, Water is Life, that in partnership with researchers of Carnegie Mellon, they created the education and water filtration tool in a form of a drinkable book. And now every page contains basic water and sanitation advice that is printed on scientific coffee filter paper. It can be used to purify water and reduce 99.9% of bacteria. And each book, some of them, or many of them, has been distributed in Ghana, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Haiti. And I believe this is something very practical, and it can provide clean water for 4 years for a single person, this drinkable book. So that is just some of the technologies as a solution for clean and potable water. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction to some solutions there. That's great. Thank you, Felix. I'm going to move on now to Tanya, who's going to share some good practices from indigenous communities who are obviously key to this around the world. Tanya, please.
Thank you very much. I think I want to make my argument around what already Mr. Amir Abdullah had mentioned on the RAP approach, which basically it's relating to restoring, anticipating, and protecting. When we address in many times the water security, when we talk about floodings, erosion, climate change, we think more on mitigating strategies and not so much on how we could have prevented that. Just to give you a figure, every 6 seconds around the world, it's estimated that a forest of the size of a soccer field is lost. So what we need to do is reinforce, support many of these communities. They have and manage ancestral knowledge that can be combined with modern technologies, but also work together within a watershed, because we forget many times that we are all interconnected. So we need to work more in collective action. When I talk about watersheds, there are many times that we are working in isolated groups and not necessarily together. So that basically means, let's imagine a watershed and talking about indigenous knowledge, using native crops as barriers to retain soil, using native seeds that are adapted already to local conditions. Now we were also addressing the topic of COVID-19 and how food security has become most important and how we need to think of local solutions. I think that indigenous food systems have the potential, and indigenous knowledge has the potential to provide food sovereignty at a local scale, help with to fight deforestation, help also to improve water access, but we also need to support many of these communities. The best way to do that is also engaging policy, working together as a chain of actors, because whatever we do within this watershed affects the other. So I would say there's like a lot of traditional knowledge with the, I'm speaking now on behalf of the Indigenous Food Systems Global Hub, that it's integrated by 19 different organizations. And what we are basically doing is capturing different local solutions for food security, but that it's so importantly interlinked. Seasonal foods, superfoods that were already mentioned before, and that do not necessarily require high inputs or high demands of water. So there's a lot of knowledge that we need to embrace, but also there are many ways in which we can improve those systems. Using some of the technologies or innovations that some of my peers already mentioned, water harvesting, helping to retain soil. Yeah, that would be my contribution.
Thank you very much indeed for that valuable contribution, Tanya. That's excellent. Thank you. And I'm going to move on now to our two entrepreneurs, Samir and Razin, who, well, I think they're going to drill us with news of cutting edge technology. So I'll go to you first, Samir. What's new in this area?
So that's a very interesting question, Fiona, because what's new and what I think is more important for sort of the newness is not necessarily new technologies. What we've seen is that in emerging markets, we're solving problems that have been solved in other parts of the world. And what's important and what's new to bring to the table is a way of implementing that solution in a local context. So for example, my company was Africa's first solar irrigation company. We didn't invent solar irrigation. We didn't make the first solar water pumps or irrigation systems, but we were the first to commercialize it in Africa, which means thinking about the operational and financial considerations to do that. We've now become the largest distributor of off-grid solar water pumps for farmers in Africa. And what we've seen is that while technology is incredibly important, we've had to do a lot of innovation on battery storage, and the IoT systems. What's become more and more important is two things: execution and new ways of thinking about allocating funding. You know, the way that I see things is that if you waved the wand and you said stop all R&D in the entire world, while we would be very disappointed, we could still solve a lot of the problems that we're solving right now. What's really important is creating new ways of thinking about allocating funding. We need more and more organizations thinking about how do we take larger chunks of funding, 100, 200, 300, $500 million, and putting them through solutions that can scale. The reason why we talk so much about solar water pumps is because it sits in the center of climate change, food security, and poverty alleviation. So one of the arguments that we make is let's think about more ways to allocate larger chunks of funding versus spending that funding across multiple solutions. So it's not necessarily new things, but new ways of allocating the things that we already have.
That's a really important point. Thank you very much indeed for that perspective, Samir. That's brilliant. And in fact, that helps to answer one of our questions, which was from Ramanathan Al in New Delhi, asking how can renewable energy be used efficiently in consuming less water for agricultural activities? And you've touched on that very well there. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to you, Razin, please, to tell us what you think are the best innovative solutions that you're looking at, please.
Right. So I guess like water scarcity, one of the biggest reasons for it is due to the infrastructural weaknesses that make up our cities, mega cities like Dhaka, where I'm from. 20 million people are residing in the city as we speak. So a lot of the issues come when it comes to proactive maintenance of water systems. And what Hydro and my team does is create that facility by providing critical metrics in relation to water intelligence by basically developing decision support systems. So for example, our current case study, which involves with the Central Laboratory Microbiology Lab of Dhaka, WASA, is basically they have a lot of issues due to water sampling of parameters, and it's very cost invasive. So what we do essentially is deploy robust hydrometric information systems that measure real-time water quality parameters in real time. And then we basically have KPIs for them to proactively assess those situations and then get on top of it. What it essentially then does is where a contamination spike would have caused huge amount of issues, let's say turbidity spikes in one region specific area. Now that they have access to hydraulic models, interactive network intelligence, they can go and immediately solve that problem without having to go through the lethargic process of kind of assessing the area, replacing
I think we may have lost. Oh, there, we've got you back. Yeah. Sorry, we lost you for a moment there, but thank you very much indeed, Razin. That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move on to some more of our questions. We don't have very long. The panel's supposed to end in 5 minutes, so I'd like you all to be very brief. Tell me who would like to answer this one. It's from Malik Gay in Dakar in Senegal, asking how can safe wastewater be used for food production in agriculture and perhaps in reforestation? Who'd like to take on this question of wastewater? Anyone?
Oh, well, I could go if that's okay. So yeah, I guess like there's already impetuses in place in relation to, I would say, radiation technology that could basically recycle these wastewater and then kind of upcycle that and push that into the, again, existing ecosystem. So what we need is standard operating procedures, certified technologies which already exist in the market. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and kind of connect that to scalability. So yeah.
That's a very good point. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Then I'd also like to ask, and we had questions for the previous panel looking at the issues particularly faced by women and by older people. We have a question this time from Nicodemus Makar in Nairobi, asking about people with disabilities who are becoming more threatened with food security and water and sanitation. Do you know of any projects who are which are looking at those issues? Anyone?
I'll touch on that, Fiona. One of the things that we find, I mean, smallholder farmers around the world make their money by either selling crops, selling animals, or selling byproducts of those animals. And all of those three things require water. And most farmers in sub-Saharan Africa get their water by physically taking buckets, lowering it down into a hand-dug well, filling it up with 20 kgs of water, which weighs about as big as those big weight plates at the gym, if anyone remembers going to a gym pre-COVID. And physically uses water to meet their domestic needs and then their agriculture needs. Most of the time, the woman of the household spends 3 to 4 hours a day doing this, and folks with disabilities are unable to naturally move these buckets of water. So when we think about designing solutions, our solar irrigation systems turn on with a pump, with a switch. I think the philosophy that we need to take when designing solutions with those who may not be able to afford them is, how do we make sure we're not designing condescending solutions? How do we make solutions that you and I would use at home, right? We want to come on and turn on a tap or turn on a switch. Why won't anyone else want to do that? And I think by thinking about it in that context, you don't get all the way there for solving the issues of folks with disabilities, but you get a lot of the way there. And it's just really thinking about, how do you not be condescending and make things that you would want to use at home?
Thank you very much. That's a really important perspective there, Samir. Thank you very much for that. That's great. And finally, we're going to have to wrap up in a moment, but I think we can just squeeze in another question, I hope, which is, sorry, I lost connection there. The final question that I hope that we can squeeze in is, how are countries aligning the issues of food, water security, and climate change in their economic recovery programs from the COVID-19 pandemic? And as we've heard, of course, you know, we need a green recovery from COVID. We need to seize this opportunity. That question comes from Fatuma Dangiza in Kigali in Rwanda. And I see your hand up there again, Samir. So perhaps you'd like to take this first, please. Thank you.
Sure, I can provide some context. One of the interesting things about solar irrigation is it provides small farmers with resilience to not only climate shocks, but the shocks of COVID. In Kenya, during the height of COVID last year, 9 out of 10 farmers reported losing their income, where 9 out of 10 of our farmers reported increasing their incomes. And what that translated into from a government perspective is, we recently partnered with the Togolese government to roll out Africa's first commercial scale solar irrigation subsidy program. So for the first time, you have a government looking at sort of newer technologies and thinking about, how do we use the lessons we've learned in other parts of the world and spend our budget in creating the subsidy program to increase the uptake of these technologies. And this has been a really interesting to watch, because the government has a lot of priorities, and they've started looking at, what are these sort of off-grid decentralized solutions, whether it's solar irrigations or solar lighting, et cetera, that can solve a lot of these problems at the same time. And let's put together a national subsidy program. So I think that you'll start to see more and more governments turn to proven technology solutions to meet the needs of, like you said, climate change, adaptation and mitigation, food security, water, et cetera.
Thank you very much indeed for that. That's a great perspective there. And I'd like to give the final word on that just to Tanya, please, as I think you have a perspective too. Please, thank you.
I think I would like to add 2 points to the discussion. First, I want to speak in the context of my country in Latin America. When we talk about policies and initiatives, I was talking just about water management approaches and how we need to bring together several actors to work towards common solutions that affect us, right? I think one of the challenges is how do we bring those actors together when they have so many competing interests? The second is when we create plans, how do we also ensure that they can last longer because they are not going to yield results from one year to other. So we need to think in long-term solutions. And I think that's one of the challenges in the context of Mexico and Latin America, because when we have new powers coming or changes in government, many of these agendas are dropped and there's a discontinuity. So we need to ensure there's a long-term continuity. The second point I want to make, I like to talk about sovereignty and how we can create local solutions. I think just from the perspective of indigenous communities, there are already many local solutions. And I like to think now that we're talking in terms of the food summit, how do we reduce, we say in some of the guidelines of the UNA Food Summit, how do we reduce the expenses, environmental, economic, labor, etc., from taking food from the field to the table? I like to think of a sovereign communities in terms of water and food. If we can make or ensure that our communities can have access to locally to food, we can also ensure that there's like less waste and we also make better use or efficient use of resources. So that would be my bet, but I think we have undermined too much the role of local communities, the role of local knowledge, not only indigenous, the role of local producers, and we need to focus much more in that and how we reinforce that with other technologies, with other approaches, but also how we come up and work together sharing responsibilities in a long-term plan.
Thank you very much for that. And I think that's a great note to end on, really, because I think that is sums up what we need there and sums up the views of a lot of the views that we've heard today. Thank you very much indeed, Tanya. And thank you to all of our panelists in this session. In fact, it was great to hear from all of you around the world there. And it was great to get in so many audience questions. Thank you very much for those questions. It was great to have those contributions. So we've come to the end, as I say, thank you to everyone, but you can carry on because this event will be archived on the UNDESA Facebook page. You can rewatch it, share it immediately after this event finishes in a moment. Also on the 28th of April, there will be the next Global Policy Dialogue on Climate Change, and it will be looking particularly at transformations on energy and transport. So another subject there. More information is available on the website too. So please do go there after this. Well, thank you all for a great session today. Thank you to all of our very knowledgeable panelists. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you to UN for hosting this. And thank you very much indeed to our audience. Thank you all.